that's what the comeback is. And it is a constant battle of you against you.
And only we know our full context of what we battled to get to these start lines, these finish lines, whether it's personal, mental, psychological, physical.
Every day it's like, okay, what can I get from myself today? Yo. Hello, and welcome to another episode of BeRad, the podcast. I just want to say before we start and get into it, thank you guys for being a fan of the podcast. Thank you for dealing with our inconsistency the last couple months. We're getting there. Carson and I are a two-man show, and we're going through a transition period. Thank you for requesting more podcasts. I hear you. They're coming. I think it took some time to figure out. It took some time to learn how to be a podcaster, and now we're recruiting some extra help, and we're going to revamp this podcast to bring more content to you. So thank you for being a fan. Please like and subscribe and do all that jazz. Today, you get the treat of listening to Abby Hall, professional ultra and trail runner for Adidas, CCC second place and third place, and just crazy fast times. She was second place and then lowered her time by an hour to get third place, and is a fighter in this sport. She and I used to train together a lot, and as someone who has been a fan and has just really admired her trajectory, I have been wanting to have this podcast for a long time. Tune in to listen to Abby Hall talk a little bit about her mindset, about recovery, her new life in Flagstaff, professionalizing ultra trail running, and self-belief. I learned so much from this podcast. I really wanted it to feel like you were tagging along on a run with us, because that's what we do together. We run. So I hope you like it. And thank you so much to Delta G, as always, for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. I am surprised training for Eiger Ultra Trail in July. Super excited. And it's been tough balancing giant days of training, 5 hours of running on a Wednesday, followed by a podcast and then meetings from 4 to 6. My routine has been to eat a big lunch, drink a cup of coffee, and then to take a Delta G ketone. My current favorite is the Performance. I know it goes ups and downs, but I think the health had to be my favorite first to get used to the strong taste, and now I really like this one. And then I also like the ketone coffee booster in the morning, just a little bit to put a pep in my step. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoy the podcast. Let me know what you think, and talk to you soon. Hey, man. Hello, and welcome to the BeRad podcast. I'm your host, Kat, and I'm super excited to have Abby Hall with us today. Professional trail runner for Adidas, one of my longest friends in trail running, and two-time CCC podium finisher and all-around badass. Just super inspiring story, and just like as a friend, been so proud of you in these always, but especially in these last 5 years, seeing you really come into your own as an athlete.
Thank you so much, friend. It's so good to be on here with you. And I feel like you have been one of my original friends in the sport. And so there's so much that we have to unpack. It's exciting.
I know. And it's crazy that it took this long for us to formally chat on this podcast about it all.
I'm super excited.
Yeah. So what we kind of talked about is I want this podcast, and it's, again, like, it's unique with you because I've spent so many training hours with you in a time where both you and I were kind of blossoming as trail runners. And our runs, like, we talked about our dreams and where we wanted to be, and it's cool because we're there, and we were always kind of in a little bit of a different spot at, different times. And, but I think our stories are parallel in a lot of ways, and we kind of went through it together. So I want the feel of this podcast to be like a fly on the wall in a training run. So people getting to listen in on like what it was like for you and I to be training together in 2016, and like what it looks like now as our dreams have come true.
I love that. And I think there's so many miles you and I have shared together that have led to where we are now. And it's just really exciting to look back and see what parts of us have stayed the same, what parts of us have changed, like who we've grown into. And I think like that all came from a really similar set of core values.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think one of those core values has always been, and it's interesting because it has been not like that in all of my female relationships in the sport, but with you, I feel like something that has been really special and kind of I credit it to a lot of my own success is just like we truly believed in each other, you know? And there'd be runs where it's like, think shit. I remember one bad race that you had, and we were talking about it. I think it was like it
After
was
a
a
Leadville?
no, it wasn't after Leadville actually. It was like a just like a 50K, you
Mm.
know, and you're hoping to do better. I think it was like a spring 50K
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Moab or
Oh
something.
yeah,
It does.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and um you know, and just those early miles in the dark, recapping these races where, you know, we're disappointed or I had a bad race at Way Too Cool. And,
Mm.
you know, we just like having that unwavering belief that no one, that I didn't feel in a lot of my other friendships. And that's just like, I think that's really special. And
Mm.
like you, something that is rubbed off on me from you is like, even as my running has been a little bit difficult, seeing your belief in yourself has carried my own self belief. Can you talk about a little bit about like where that self belief has come from and how it's grown? Because it has grown and that is amazing.
I love that. I have always been a big believer that we have to believe in ourselves long before others are going to believe in us. And I see the role of our friendship back then and the role we played for one another as being this next step where it's like we both had that inner dream, that fire that believed we were capable of some big
Yeah.
things. And sometimes you need a good friend, a peer, a teammate, a partner to like almost try on those dreams and talk about them and flesh them out and talk about what the path there is going to look like the messy middle. And I think that for both of us, it was well received because we both like were at a similar place and believed like had similar dreams that we were sharing. Like we thought, you know, and I think that Boulder, especially like, when I look at like the Rocky Mountain Runners community, like all the different groups we were involved in there, like it was like this really safe haven and home base to go out and like try for big things at races and success or fail, you come home and you're running green on Monday, or you and I are going out for some miles on Bobo together. And to have that safe space where you can kind of debrief and, figure out like troubleshoot what went wrong or be like, why am I so sad about this? Or like, how the heck did that go as well as it did? Like, that's amazing. Whatever the outcome, to have that kind of safe space, I think was really, really unique. I mean, I feel like I still remember going to like, group runs together where like I would hear about someone coming back from like an international race. And like it was the first time I was hearing about some of these races like CCC and stuff like that. And like learning about just the greater worldwide sport that was happening beyond our Colorado version of it was like I feel like I was just like a sponge for it. Like I was soaking it up. And the more we were learning about these things, the more we wanted to try stuff. And like, yeah, I think that a lot of it, like a common theme though, was that you and I were never afraid to fail and mess up. And
Yeah.
I think that is the defining characteristic, and being able to sit here and talk about it years later and like, either falling out of love with it or, not wanting to talk about it or just
Yeah.
going quiet. And I think that it is something that most people in the sport share. Like, I can't think of anyone who's not had that feeling of banging their head against the wall at one time or the other, trying to figure out what went wrong or, I mean, so many different aspects. I think it's something that we all share. And so, having a safe space, not being afraid to fail, and just like really loving the journey of it, I think is what comes to mind the most when I look back at those days.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that comes to mind too is having a safe space to fail and talk about the failure. Like,
Yeah.
even if we're unafraid to fail and like putting these big goals out there, and like you and I both we're like, we are going to win this race. And I think that is something that's like, especially at the time, not a lot of people did. But then having, and more often than not, we did not accomplish those goals. We did not, and having that safe space to like, yeah, I failed, but I know you still believe in me
Yeah.
was, I mean, for me, crucial to our friendship. Like, yeah, um, I didn't do it. I didn't get the Grand Canyon FKT. You
Yeah.
didn't get the John Muir
Yeah.
FKT, when you
Yeah.
went for the first time. But like being able to go for it, fail, but it not impacting the way that you and I saw each other as athletes, I think was, I mean, so impactful. And like, again, still something that I carry like, oh my God, I have
Mhm.
failed so much in the last 5 years.
Mhm.
I've just had the freaking roller coaster of,
Mhm.
of running. But like remembering that I can come back, and be like, okay, I still have that self-belief. Just because I fail doesn't mean that I'm any less of an athlete. And I think that is something that not only our friendship had, but something that you just exemplify as an
Mhm.
athlete.
Thank you so much. I mean, I feel like one thing I've always admired about you is you make the the mega epics and bonks and, whatever. It's a GI issue, it's a stomach thing, it's like something crazy. You have a way of taking all those things and making it like an absolute party and so fun. And about like, and I feel like you let people in on it in a way that makes them feel like, oh, so I'm not the only one that like had this kind of day out there, or like I think back to even too when you were like balancing your teaching and all of this and like just the hustle of it all. Like there's bound to be plenty of bad days when this is not your, especially when it's not your full-time thing. And I think of how, yeah, you just have a quality about you that makes those steps along the way feel fun and lighthearted and like cool. And I've always admired that about you.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you. Well, again, in part to you because you would consume anything that I said, and then we'd have like a talking point for our next.
Exactly.
Um, so from, now seeing your career from afar, and I moved up to Ned when you were still in Boulder, and we stopped running together quite as much, and then you moved to Flag, I moved home to Hawaii. I have been an observer of you, which I've just also adored. And something that I saw change around the time of canyons was when you did canyons and right before Western States is like you seem to not only, I mean, that self-belief was still there, but
Mhm.
it was solidified. Even though performances weren't, I mean, you obviously had some,
Yeah.
but performances weren't quite as consistent yet. And something
Yeah.
I felt like a switch flip in you. And
Mm.
maybe that was just me watching you, but it seemed like something changed around then. Can you talk a little bit about that and how these like, dreams start to solidify and that like it seemed like a self-belief feedback loop a little bit.
Absolutely. I mean, it is really unique that you picked out canyons in particular because right around then is when it was the week or the week after, I think it was the week before canyons, whatever, somewhere around that time that I put in my 2 weeks notice at my design job at the time. And it was such a leap. And for a while, I had been, balancing my work as a full time graphic designer with my running. And for a while, that was really gratifying. I enjoyed being able to race and then come back to work on Monday. But I felt almost like would hide behind that at times and kind of downplay like how much I really cared about this. And for me, being fortunate enough to be able to make that leap in the first place is, something I don't take for granted. But being able to make that leap to focus on that full time was absolutely a leap of self confidence and kind of a vulnerable one because I felt like I was stepping out onto the edge of this high dive going, okay, world, I care about this enough that I'm willing to say that this is how I spend my day every day, and this is what I want to make my livelihood on. And it's like a bold claim in and of itself, just to
Yeah,
be able to say, yeah, I'm going to be a professional athlete. And I mean, not that I wasn't before, but I felt like going full time was a new level of courage was required. And
totally.
so I think that from then forward, I was able to pour myself into the details a bit more than I had before. And I think there's this feedback loop that comes with that. Like um when you're trying to master the little things, when you believe in yourself enough that you're willing to, spend your full-time focus on it, the focus of like your partner, your coach, like all the people involved in helping you do your best. I mean, there's more on the line. At least it feels like that. And um, I wanted to make my how do I like I feel like I describe this weird sometimes, but I always talk about like wanting to show running how much I love it. And I felt that more, I think, when I made that shift of like, how can I show the sport how much I love it? How can I show the people around me that invest themselves into me like how much I love their support, and how can I just better exemplify these dreams that have always been lurking within.
Yeah. And you're like, what is so interesting is we came from kind of an era and a community that was kind of anti going all in, and and I just want to say for you, that makes it extra brave because were you still in Boulder when you went full time? I forget. Yeah.
I was, yep.
And not that like any community can, I feel like this was kind of the era in ultra running, not just Boulder, but um it was like the era of like do it all, work full time and be the athlete, and that was kind of glorifying. But I think you're right. I think it does it is a cop out, if you, and not totally, but it is, I think to go all in on anything and to truly try your best is so vulnerable. And I don't think I realized that until, the last couple years of, truly focusing on my own health. This is the first time I've done that. And like,
Mm.
you have no more cop outs, and the same thing is when you're investing everything in it. Um, yeah. I'm just curious, like, what were those conversations like with Coop during that time
Mm.
when not a lot of athletes were going all in and going full?
Mm. Absolutely. I mean, I think the one thing that I remember us discussing at the time was I was thinking kind of like, so will my training change a ton? And, like I think Coop is very, very clear about, like the work is not sexy. It is like, it's going hard when you're supposed to go hard, going easy when you're supposed to go easy, etc. And so he was like, no, the training won't change that much just because you have more hours available in the day. He said, I think maybe we would shift up to like, 10 to 20% more during like heavier volume phases. But that the big emphasis would really be the time for recovery and also like the time around travel, which like, as like traveling to these races, camps, events, etc., is like a big part of the athlete life. And I think that was something I felt like was particularly hard when I was like working remotely while doing that, and just like um, I think it also allowed me to have more time to go out to courses ahead of time and scout and things like that. So I think that was what our conversation was around at the time, was really around like, will the logistics of training day in and day out change that much? No, but will the lifestyle around that better support and pour into the training? Yes. So I think it's something that I think not everybody necessarily benefits from too. Like I know plenty of people, we both do, who love to do their training and love to throw themselves into like something different immediately after. And that separation is really fun for them. But I've personally felt like it's worked for me. And it kind of started really as an experiment because I felt like I could always go back to design if I needed to, or even like scale it. Like I could pick up some freelance work. But ultimately I have uh, not done, and I mean, I've done a few design projects since then, but um, yeah, it's been a full transition since then. And it's now been 3 years. That's a big 3 years. It's felt like longer than 3 years, but yeah, 3 years since I made that leap.
Yeah. And the other thing that's there and that I think about all the time because I mean, honestly, I think about it every day. How can I make this more of a full-time job?
Yeah.
It's something that I want because I am coaching, 30 hours a week and podcasting and the podcasting I love, coaching I love, but I'm trying to minimize the stuff and it's not so much the time, but for me it's the mental energy of juggling everything. It's spending my runs thinking about all my clients. It's spending time, so much time thinking about logistics
Yeah.
and time management and like, okay, I gotta, be done at this time so I can hop on a call in an hour and then be on calls till 6 and then eat dinner. And, how can you talk about it? And there's this great Alexi Papa's quote that talks about
Mhm.
how willpower is a finite source, and
Mhm.
I feel like that is the thing that gets is maybe the most important piece of going full time, but is the least talked about. Everyone's like it's going to be more volume, but it's actually just having the brain space to give running your all.
100%. I mean, it's really like that, anyone I think who's like self-employed, like the way you're balancing those things right now of your coaching, your training, your podcasting, like you have to manage yourself every hour of the day. And it's, it's a full-time job to manage one's own brain and businesses and efforts. And I think that you're spot on with that quote. Yeah, the willpower piece is huge. I think especially when it comes down to not doing too much. Because I think, most of us in the sport love our grit, our tenacity, our grind. But I think the finer detail there can be also like knowing when you need a day, knowing when to pull the plug, knowing when too much is too much. And it's this constant dance that requires a lot of mental energy and patient friends and people around you that are willing to verbal process.
Verbal process or to give you hard truths like,
Yeah,
hey, this is
exactly.
too much on your plate. You're crazy.
Exactly.
You can't do it all.
Yeah, exactly. Like someone to just remind you to say no and that that's okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And like now that, but like, the thing, the kind of the catch 22 with like having too much mental space is like when things go wrong, you don't have that distraction and you don't have that, thing to, shut off. Like, oh, this is my part, the part of me that's not running. And like, how have you been balancing that since you've gone? And this is all like questions because this is, I have used you as an example of someone that I want to follow when I'm able for years. I've been like, this is my plan. I'm going to save up. I'm going to keep working with my brands. I'm going to tell them to invest in me,
Yeah.
and tell them like if when I have the resources, I want to dedicate this, and you've done that, and like it's so impressive. Something that I do worry about is what I said is like, okay, when things don't go well, like, and you have all this time and you made these sacrifices, like, what then?
Mm. I mean, I think the first very critical layer when things go wrong is having a team around you that you can rely on. I think that
Mhm.
it's everything. For me, it's Cordis, my husband, my coach, and like the practitioners that I work with, as well as like my teammates with Adidas. I'm really close with all of them, and then like friends and family around that. My parents, my mom, who I spend a lot of time with, verbal processing things, and having that support layer around it is really the steadying hand
Yeah.
when it hits the fan. And I really experienced that firsthand this year. Had a major knee trauma injury, freak accident, and major surgery, major reconstructive surgery on bone and tendons in my knee, um, and a really long rehab journey from that. And that was the first layer that held me together. I mean, having having friends that would come sit in the living room with me or bring me a smoothie, or having Coop would come and sit with me. Like when I was post-op in Vail, Coop would just come sit and hang out with me for long stretches, just keep me company. And um, like even though none of that sitting and hanging out together would have to do with running, it was every bit to do with the feeling that someone cared and that someone believed in me, even at my absolute personal low.
Yeah.
So I think like that support layer is massive. But I think also like kind of back to what we're saying with the, sitting with the openness that comes from, okay, running is my full-time job and I'm not going to be able to run for many, many months. What does day in, day out look like? And I had like I would talk with friends during that time who were like, "Oh, like you should have a kid now," or "What if you go back to design?" or "What if you like just like kind of like it's an open book." And to be honest, my mind was totally focused on the rehab process and making that my my job each day. I had a couple people say something like, "Oh, I can, what was the comment I'm trying to think of? It was like people would say, I can only imagine like how hard this is because it's your full-time job. Like it's like just got to be a lot." But also at the same point, I'm like, I was such a mess. I cannot imagine if I was trying to go into an office from 9 to 5 and come home and do my rehab. I mean, huge, huge props to anyone balancing rehabbing a major injury alongside like demanding full-time work. I cannot imagine that because the mental and physical load of the recovery alone was so much just to get through the day. I really can't imagine having a house full of kids, having places I needed to be, and people that were really depending on me then. That
Yeah.
is yeah, my deepest respect to people who balance those levels of things. So in a lot of ways, I feel like I had it really easy because I had world class support and at every turn. And I feel really, yeah, really fortunate that I was able to find my way out of that.
Yeah. And like, you said you were a mess, and I can relate. I had a major hip surgery that I thought was something, and it turned out to be something else.
Yeah.
And just like you, 6 months off running, and it was freaking brutal. And
Yeah.
my like a piece of me was dead during
Yeah.
that time. I was, and it's really amazing having a partner who can call that out honestly, and we like reflect on that time. And it's tough to remember myself like that.
Mm.
But for me, only now is my self-belief coming back. And that is just like,
Mm.
but I mean, for maybe the last year, I was going through the motions of,
Mhm.
yes, I still believe in myself. Yes,
Mhm.
but I didn't feel it. I was definitely talking the talk, and I feel like only now. And honestly, my behavior around it was kind of destructive, and
Mm.
not like terribly, but I certainly I do honestly think a huge part of that was because I was working so
Mm.
much, and I was working and trying to balance the injury, which was, like we were in our first couple months of marriage, and literally Carson was having to help me go to the bathroom, and that was like, and then trying to take meetings and stuff. But I also think that part of it was just like that a piece of that self-belief died, and but it didn't for you. And I saw it, and maybe it did, but you
Mhm.
did. If it did, you sure freaking did a good job
Mhm.
faking it.
That's interesting. I think first of all, I'm just like, yeah, I feel sad knowing those kind of moments all too well and that you went through those as well. And, I really appreciated you reaching out like when I was going through everything this summer. It really meant a lot to me because yeah, I know you were familiar with all those same feelings. And I had, I mean, a ton of people like reach out and be really thoughtful, but there were a handful of interactions like yourself that, meant something extra to me because I know they had been there themselves. And I think that's one thing I'm carrying forward with me um, is that empathy piece and remembering to, I don't know, remember how bad it was, especially when I see others that might be going through the same thing. And to be honest, I'm sure you feel this way too, but looking back, it was just a bit of a blur. Like I feel like there's even stretches where I like don't remember everything very well. Like just a like blur of really sad days. And like, yeah, it's I don't know. Yeah, there's no other way around it other than that. It was really, really hard. Um, just to, yeah, get from one day to the next. But I think, like on the self-confidence piece, it's been interesting because I feel this like I actually still am kind of feeling this duality of on one hand, I'm like, don't expect much because I'm coming back from this major thing and like it's like amazing that I'm even running at all. And then the other hand, I'm like, I have more confidence than ever. And I believe like it's gonna, you know, I believe that I'm capable of even more than I realized. Like it's this strange blend of like just deeply grateful to simply be here at all, but also holding the bar higher for myself than I've held it before, even though it's an illogical time for me to be raising the bar.
I don't think so though, because, kind of when there is no pressure, it's when we see the biggest breakthrough performances. When
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing to prove,
Yeah.
except for like what can I do on the day. That
Yeah.
is when time and time again we see the greatest of
Mm-hmm.
all time become the greatest,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't I think you're right. I think your best performances are to come
Mm-hmm.
too. But that's amazing that like I can see that for you, and for me I've had a really hard time getting there, and I think maybe it's because I mean your injury was so sudden. Mine
Mm-hmm.
was gradual, and I was
Yeah.
able to keep trying to race on it for many, many years, even though I don't
Yeah.
know if you know the full thing. Turns out my whole glute med was torn and detached at the insertion. And I'd been running on it since I did Leadville in 2019, and I had no idea. So, like, I think maybe, where you kind of had this experience when you were at the top of your career, which is very hard, very hard to have that screeching halt and momentum. Um, it's also freaking amazing that you are raising your bar, because I see you and I believe that and I know that, and it's radiating off of you.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's scary that feeling of it seemingly all slipping away. And I think especially because you saw as well as anyone, it took me a long time to get there. And I felt like, am I going to have to do that all over again?
Yeah.
And in some ways, yes, but in other ways, like I feel like there's a quote about this. I can't remember the exact wording, but like starting from experience. And I think that counts for a lot too. And the I tried to keep that self-belief piece alive as much as possible because in some ways I think that takes the longest to cultivate far more than any physical adaptations or fitness. I think that can be what takes years. And so to keep that spark alive was was something that took a lot of work. And I really mainly just did it through a lot of like I would do a lot of visualizing. Like when I would be on the single leg spin bike, I would do a lot of talking about it with Cordis or thinking about it and trying to connect it to those small, tedious rehab protocols day in, day out.
Yeah.
Um, I tried to connect that spark to the little things that I could control each day that would move the needle back towards them.
Yeah.
It's
Pretty
not
amazing.
easy to do.
Yeah. And it's pretty like that was your why through the
Yeah.
injury.
Yeah.
recovery. And I think that is amazing. And I think, like, honestly, I totally lost my why and had to refine it and then refine it again. There were so many days and months
Mm.
where I was like, what is the freaking point?
Yeah.
And I know now that I'm here, I know it and I feel it. But like for you to go through all that and to be so focused through
Mm.
recovery, that's so impressive. And I want to my athletes that I coach and to anyone who's going through an injury, I like want to clip that and then just be like, this is how you go through injury
Oh,
and make the little things meaningful because that
yeah.
is hard to do when you're doing these tedious exercises that you hate and everything hurts and it's you're so far from where you want to be. It's like kind of like in an ultra when you think about the finish line
Yeah.
when instead of like the next aid station, you screw yourself. It's too much. It's too much to process at once. And I think that's kind of what I was doing in the injury. I was like, I won't be able to do anything for a year. I won't be able to be back to normal for a year. How do
Right.
I process that?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I texted Coop recently. It was after, I don't know, not even a notable run, but things had started to feel like they were clicking. And I texted him something like, I think this is gonna work. And like, of course he's like, yeah, no, like I think it's gonna work too. That's why we're doing all this. But it's like just that moment of realizing like, oh my gosh, this narrow needle that I feel like I'm trying to thread and these exercises that I wasn't totally sure would actually build back to running, which would build
Yeah.
back to fitness, which would build back to being competent in the mountains. Like there's so many dots to connect that feel so far-fetched when you're in it. And all of a sudden to like gain that perspective and be like, I think this needle is going to get threaded. I think it's going to work. That
Yeah.
was a really cool moment. And in something that I would remind a lot of people of that are in it, that the dots do eventually often connect. I realized I had, a lot of things in my favor, like, luck and the right people and the right injury or whatever you want to call it. Like, I'm not saying it's a solution for everything, but I think that more often than not, the dots connect. And even when it's
Yeah.
hard to see at the moment.
Totally. And they tend to connect all at once.
Yeah,
They will
right?
not connect for a
Yeah,
really, really long time. And I
that's
will
so
say
true.
that as someone where they didn't connect
Uh,
for a long, long time. I mean, I had my surgery in the way before you
mhm.
and they're connecting right
Yeah,
now, like on these runs in this training block.
yeah,
After 18 months, which is funny. That's what the doctor said. It would take about 18 months, but like
yeah,
that, you don't believe them. You think you're special. You think, because you're, an
yeah,
athlete, that you're going to be the exception.
right.
But be patient and the wait, believe that the dots will connect. And even when you don't believe, like,
Hmm.
which I didn't, just go
Hmm.
through the motions. If
Yeah,
it's something that you love, go through the motions.
yeah,
And when you can't, take a day off,
yeah,
talk to your person, talk to the
yeah.
people, um, and then just wake up and go through the motions again. And then eventually it'll be fun again. And then eventually,
Mm,
all at once, the dots will connect.
mm. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, like, yeah, making the dot connecting fun. That is a hard part of this too, because it is often very not glamorous. The dot
It's
connect.
it's like maybe 99% not glamorous.
Really.
you know, it's 99% boring, not glamorous,
Yeah.
frustrating. Am I doing this exercise right? This doesn't feel good. And I think that's the thing that like people don't see too is like, you know, for me at least, I didn't know if I was doing it right. I
Yeah.
was going through this process and I had no idea if
Yeah.
this was going to work or if I was doing it right or like, but just again, like waking up and doing it again and just chipping away so slowly and believing that there's something under that.
I totally agree. I feel like this sounds so silly, but I'm just going to share it anyway. One thing that I worked on during my rehab was like I would take like some of the little videos and clips that I was making during like my rehab and recovery and all this. And I like put them together in like a little video for myself. And I would like picture like what I wanted the next clips to look and feel like. And it sounds so like cheesy, and it's like one of those like some embarrassing things to admit that I was like making this little video of whatever, but of myself, like, and how I hoped it would be. But I really did visualize like what do I want those next clips to look and feel like? And what's even the end of this video going to feel like? Am I going to be running? Like, am I going to be smiling? Am I going to, like, what's it going to feel like? What's that moment going to be like? And I think that was just like a tiny example of something that I did to kind of try and visualize those dots before me, even if I couldn't quite make them out yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And then where does returning to racing fit in these dots and
Mm,
videos? And
yeah.
like, how have you pictured yourself? You're about
Yeah.
to race Mont Blanc, it's 90K,
Yeah.
and that's a big freaking race. And you raced in gray, and
Yeah.
congrats, and you won, and
Thanks.
you were second overall, right? To
Yep.
Cordis.
Tortoise.
So cool. But Mont Blanc 90K is like your real comeback. And
Yeah.
like, so where are those dots right now?
100%. I definitely did not make my comeback here easy on myself. Yeah, I signed up for that in just a few weeks here, a month. And then UTMB at the end of summer, the full 100 miler there. And I think it was a lot of my choice around that was kind of like backing out from UTMB. Like, what do I need to feel confident at UTMB? And a big thing was just getting my mountain legs under me, but also emotionally and psychologically, like getting back to Chamonix. And I have nothing but awesome memories there, which is so cool. But it also is a kind of emotional influence on me that I wanted to diffuse a little bit by getting out there and doing an event out there and not being a perfectionist about it and just getting back to a place that's special to me without it being the quite so massive stage of UTMB,
Yeah.
so that I can show up in August, sleeves rolled up, ready to work. So that was kind of like partially my logic around the selection of it. But yeah, it's a burly race, 90K with like 22,000 feet of climbing or something like that. So it's been really fun to get the mountain legs back. And also like, I think, for me, that has felt like a more palatable transition back to racing than like really like a fast, hard running. Even though I've been doing some of that too, it's felt, a lot more digestible to me to get into this rhythm of big uphill hikes,
Yeah.
being in the mountains for long days. So, and also that's just what I've been hungry for, I think, in this whole
Yeah.
rehab is like, just get me back out there for some big days. So
Yeah.
it's been like the right set of motivators for me. I'm excited.
I think that's wise to do a lot of hiking I think I went into Black Canyons and I was not absorbing the fast stuff yet.
Mm,
I think that takes time. It takes
totally.
time to trust your body. I mean, it's was good to be able to trust my body to go that long again, but to trust
Yeah.
your body to go fast, that's
Yeah.
like a whole other can of worms that I feel
Totally.
like my subconscious was still kind of like putting on the brakes for me a little bit.
Totally. Oh yeah. And I think it's like kind of one thing at a time too, right? Like it'd be really hard to go from something fast to something mountainous. Like those are big swings and big,
Yeah.
jumps in specificity. And so I think I wanted to, UTMB is the A goal of the year. And so I wanted to build the year around that and around supporting that the best I could. And kind of like him backloading the season too. Like, to be
Mhm.
honest, hopped into the local race here, Zane Grey, the marathon there, hopped into that with um, not a ton of notice, but mainly just to go kind of rip off that racing band-aid. Which, I feel like you and I know from years of this, like it can be so emotional to get back to those start lines or those finish lines that it
Yeah.
felt good to go do that right here in my backyard.
Yeah.
And that was a emotional finish line, and
I bet.
yeah, it was really special. And yeah, it was like, a relatively quiet local race, rainy day, and like, finish line. It's like a couple people there, Cordis waiting there in his puffy coat for me. And I just started sobbing. Like, I mean, I was just, and I feel like everyone around was kind of like, whoa, like, what's with this girl? Like, this really been tour. I have no idea.
Yeah, right.
Like at those moments to me that are the coolest also where it's not the mobbed high stakes finish line that always means the most. Sometimes it is just those events where it's you against you and you're just out there with your community like having a meaningful day. So it was right at the core of it for me.
Totally. And because the you against you is like such a, that's what the comeback is, and not, it is a constant battle of you against you, regardless what the injury is from. It's like, every day it's like, okay, what can I get from myself today? What do I have on this day? And that's like what you got to do every day as you're coming back.
Totally. I mean, I think the context to, like you against you and like the context that we're each coming from is so crucial. Like I feel like I heard this talked about recently, maybe for like college football or something, where it's like it's so hard to compare the kid that came from the campus that has, the high-end facilities and tons of alumni money versus like the kid who like worked their way out of a tough household and like found their way to the top against all odds. It's like the context that we're coming from is everything, and only we know our full context of what we battled to get to these start lines, these finish lines, whether it's personal, mental, psychological, physical. We are all working through our own context that get us here, and I think it's helpful to remember that.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to remember that. And it's important for everyone when people look at accomplishments in their own accomplishments to like remember that too. Like, this is what you were dealing with. And I have one athlete that I coach that just went through major
Yeah.
surgery this year, or last fall actually. Major, I forget exactly what it was, but it was like intestinal surgery, had a bunch of scar tissue around his stomach, and
Oh,
two surgeries where his stomach was torn open. And then this year, after like 10 years of applying, he got into Western States.
oh my
So
God.
it's been such, and
Mm.
it's been like such a rocky road back. But he came back from, and he was like, last week he's just struggling because it's a short time to go from like in the
Oh,
hospital this fall to Western States,
yeah.
and but last week he was like, I don't know if I'm going to do this. I don't know,
Oh,
like, if I'm ready. I'm dealing with these PT stuff, and I reminded him like, hey, there's going to be weird stuff that comes up because we basically are starting back from zero.
oh,
Not zero because you have the base and the experience, but from where you're at to where you're at now, we had to like, it's actually like less than zero because we had to like recover from a state of, being in the hospital.
yeah.
And he came back from the camp, Memorial Day camp, Western States camp this weekend, and he texted me and he was like, I'm gonna fight. I want to fight for
Oh,
this. And
oh,
that, you know, whatever. And he went from being like, I need to perform at Western States to like, I need to fight for Western States, because
oh.
like, not despite my year, but because of my year.
Mhm.
Because I've had this, and because I know I can do it, and because I know I need to do this, and that, it's just it happens at like every single level. We all have like a story, and we all are fighting to get to this finish line in whatever way that we can. And truly, like, you know, I was thinking about you in my run today.
Mm.
I did mini green repeats, so a lot of time thinking about about Boulder, and I was thinking about how you get to the finish line no matter what. And like,
Mm.
I hope this athlete hears this podcast, and I know he will,
Mm.
uh, and thinks about you, because he does too. He freaking fights. He's had some bad races and he fights for every single finish line. And since we've been working together, he has not DNF'd, and like he will get to the
That's
state finish line, and it's really cool. I'm really proud of him.
That is incredible. I am gonna want to have you send me his name so that I can follow his race at Western States because that is inspiring.
Yeah,
That's
shout out to Jonathan Throne. I'll link his bib number to Western
please
here
do.
when it comes out.
I'm officially emotionally invested. So
Yeah,
yeah, huge. Like that's so cool. I love the text. I'm gonna fight. That's like
I know.
chills.
It is. It's
Mm.
chills.
You are the perfect person to be coaching him on so many levels for that. Working through a
Right.
comeback, getting to Western States, the fight, like that. You're the perfect person to be coaching him. It's super cool.
Thanks. Yeah, I, I really like working with him, and on all my athletes, like they're fighting through something to get there, and
Yeah.
it is a fight. And I think what you said of just like and I want to talk about this in a second. We don't have that much time, but like talking about the spring energy stuff, and
Mhm.
I was kind of reflecting on it today, and I know your coach Coop said that, for context, Spring Energy Awesome Sauce, we just found out that they have about half the
Yeah.
carbohydrates and calories that we thought we did, which I can personally cite races that I was like, oh, that makes sense. And
100%.
but it's not, and Coop was saying that it's the professional athletes trying to make a living that he feels bad for, which I appreciate, and
Mhm.
I'm sure as he is very invested in his pros.
Yeah.
But it is for me, it's actually the everyday athletes that are parents that have a full-time job that buy these gels at 450 a
Yeah.
pop or 480 a pop that are
Yeah.
like sacrificing huge chunks of time with their family, balancing work, which we've
Yeah.
both done and we know is not easy.
Yeah.
And then I think back to some of my athletes' races where I'm like, oh my God, we didn't know what happened. It didn't make sense. And now we know, and
Yeah.
that feels like robbery.
Oh, I know. I mean, I think of very specific race moments now, races that I've gone, raced internationally, flown over weeks in advance, spent tons of so much time and emotional energy and resources and money on trying to do everything I could to do my best performance. Coop flying across the ocean to support me. And to now look back and say, well, there's a very simple answer why that Coke was making you feel better at aid stations. It's because you needed some carbohydrates. Your body was starving. And it's really sad. And I agree. It's a waste of everybody's time, energy, and money that we've ended up in this situation. For anyone who has uh, you know, uh been investing in these products, it's really unfortunate news. And so I think that we all have a right to be mad about it. And there's a lot of other great products out there that I think we can trust and turn to.
Yeah.
And so I've personally been enjoying the boost of consuming some proper carbs on my runs recently. And I'm like, I had a volume block last week and I was like, dang, this feels really good. Like, I wonder what the difference is. It's like, yeah, turns out when you get in, 70, 80, 90 carbs an hour, like you got a little more spring in your step when you're walking around the house afterwards and, getting out of bed in the morning and popping out for your next run. Like things aren't quite so hard. And I just feel really fortunate that, it didn't create long-term health issues for me. Or, there's such a trickle down from this that
Seriously.
is really, really serious. So
Yeah.
I think for all of us to continue the dialogue around it is important, and I think we're all allowed to be mad. Athletes that have consumed it or worked with the brand are allowed to be mad. People that have been the faces of products are allowed to be mad, and we're all going to be kind of moving through this in our own way and our own pace and everything. But I think we're all largely on the same page here. Like we've been
Yeah.
due.
Yeah, it's as an athlete that was sponsored by them for many years, and as a coach too, who was, you know, what works for me, I do talk about, you
Yeah.
know, it's hard to stomach that I directly would impacted people's
Yeah.
races by by endorsing a product. It does make me feel icky.
Yeah. And we're all learning, like I think
Totally.
there's things, there's questions we didn't even know to be asking 6 months ago. Like,
I
and I
know.
think this will impact the way that we move forward, the way that we engage with products, recommend them, critique them, the standards that we hold them to. And so I think it's all really important dialogue.
Totally. And I think this is just a huge part of the growing pains that ultra running is going through as it
Yeah.
professionalizes.
Yeah.
Like you truly are on the forefront of professionalizing ultra running. And I think your recovery process and, being at Adidas HQ specifically for rehab, like that is incredible.
Mhm.
And I think that is the gold standard to which brands should be working with their athletes and investing in their athletes at. But I think like this is an example on the extreme other side of like, okay, if we want to professionalize this sport, like we do have to hold brands to a high standard, even if they're small businesses that we're supporting. That's not an excuse. It should be, being a small business is incredible, but it's not an excuse to be negligent.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, in some ways, like our sport has gone from this like it's almost like a business, going from like a couple buddies that started a startup to a small company that got an office to now we're like a pretty big, massive worldwide company, if that metaphor works, to
It
you
totally
know,
does.
yeah, like
It's
we've
like
got
totally
a yeah,
corporate,
like
you
big
know?
growing pains. It's like I don't know, we have different kind of issues that we're facing now as a result of the increased scale and like there's different standards that we need to enforce across the board for the whole organization, if you will, to keep running smoothly.
Yeah. And like speaking of that, how do you feel about just I mean, not just how it's becoming more professional, because I think we're probably on the same page. Like I think it's great for the
Mhm.
sport. I love to see the sport grow, but you know, some of these other growing pains that we've had and how, the UTMB Ironman partnership and like that controversy, like how do you feel about all of that?
Hmm. I mean, I think as far as the growing pains as a whole and the professionalization side, I actually read a social media post yesterday that I thought paralleled this really well. It was from Sarah Sturm, who's a professional gravel cyclist, and she talked about growing with the sport and how she's like, if you had told me 5, 6, 7 years ago what the stakes would be to be at the front, she's like, I don't think I could have adapted or risen to those standards. But the fact that each year we advance a bit more, we learn more about how to nail our performance, nail the gear, nail the nutrition. Like she feels like she's grown alongside that professionalization. And so I
Yeah.
definitely feel the same way. I mean, if when you and I were running together, I was just at that point focused on, like, am I getting in some calories while I run? Did I have like, I probably was having like a gel every hour, not really thinking much about it, not
Yeah.
really thinking about my recovery or hydration or sodium or strength or anything like that. Wasn't getting treatment for anything. But I think like slowly as the tip of the spear of the sport gets sharper, I've had fun growing alongside that. And that's one thing Sarah mentioned in her post as well, which I thought was very eloquently put, was like, the fun that comes from kind of following the tip of the spear of something
Yeah.
and how it's an enjoyable process to professionalize for a lot of people. It's not inherently wrong or bad. I think there can often be a lot of shame um, around professionalization, especially for ultra running, which I find curious because I don't feel like professionalization is perceived negatively across other endurance sports. I feel like it's pretty glamorized, like in cycling and triathlon. And for some reason, I feel like ultra running as a whole has had some resistance to it.
I think
And I think that
particularly in the
is
United
because,
States.
rightfully so, people are protective of this very special sport in our community and what it holds in each of our hearts and all of our corners of the world. So I think it's a blend. I think there's always going to be the race orgs that exist and can put on really great, meaningful grassroots events for people to go do a first long distance at. And there's always going to be the big, big money backed UTMBs of the world for people to go make a name at. But at the end of the day, my experiences at a race like UTMB have been some of the most meaningful in my career. And I certainly wouldn't be able to do this full time without success that I've had at racing out there. And I also look at women I've shared podiums with out there who have come from everywhere and been able to make a name for themselves and throw their hat in the ring as someone who wants to try hard at it. And I think that's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. What would you say to someone who may be like us in 2016, we holding the dream? What would you say to a woman like that?
I would say to hold that fire of self-belief, that torch, hold on to it tightly because you're going to go through a lot of dark places before that flame of self-belief is going to get to fully envelop things. I mean, I
Yeah,
think of so many lows that both you and I went through before that inner spark got to show itself. And I know, when you thinking of like Western states, when you won Western states, I wasn't surprised. You weren't, I mean, you were, it was still exciting, but I don't think you were surprised. Like, I don't, because I think you always knew you were capable of something like that. And um, I think those moments just show like how long you held on to that spark of self-belief before it got to actualize itself. So I would
yeah,
encourage people to work through those lows because it is a part of it, and to um, also to just really cling to your love of it, your love of the sport. That'll guide you through a lot and makes it all worth it and all fun, even the low points.
yeah, 100%. Yeah. I'd like really emphasize to just like be present, where keep believing, keep looking for your opportunity and take it when it's there, but also like really enjoy where you are, because look at us, we're like doing great in our careers now, but we're still nostalgically talking about when it was just a dream,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
all of it is amazing, even when you're in this, I would say, especially for when you're fighting for it.
100%, 100%. I mean, I still think back to like those runs we were doing around that time and how like I just remember like when you went and won Western States, and then it was like I feel like that opened the door of what I believed was possible for myself because I
Yeah,
was like, oh, like maybe like this is just kind of how it works. Like you just put your head down and work and you show up and you do your best. You wait for an opening and you go win the thing. And like it suddenly raised the bar for me so much, going back to, that idea of raising the bar, that I think that played a big role in where I am now, is seeing you go do that, seeing Claire win Leadville, like this kind of network of peers all around Boulder that were just like going and crushing major races made me feel
yeah,
like that was normalized. And I'm really grateful for that just community of excellence that we got to grow from at that point in life.
totally. It was like such a awesome time to be
Yeah.
here and to be around each other, all of us doing, really just going for it and like unabashedly. And I think that is the key thing, is like so often you're right that sometimes going for big goals is I don't want to say people can be coy about it, but yeah,
Hmm.
people can be coy about it, or, it's kind of taboo to talk about. And maybe not that's changing, but it's kind of taboo to be like, yeah, I'm going to Western States and I'm going to try and win it, when you're in a group of friends and you've never done anything like that before. People are like, whoa, you sure? And I think, you know, that's how it happens. And that's how like the new people break in the sport, is just like believing, even, you're right, even though everybody around me was surprised. I wasn't surprised that when I won Western. I know you weren't either. And
Oh.
just like I wasn't surprised um, when you got a golden ticket at
Mhm.
Canyons in that first race. I knew it was coming for you. And then when you got second at CCC and then you took an hour off that time for third, I've never been surprised at your success.
Mm. Thank you. I mean, that's friendship right there, right?
Yeah, truly. It's knowing and believing in each other. And I think that's really special. And I'm so grateful to have gone through all of this with you.
I feel the same way. I'm so grateful I know you and that you're my friend and that we have so many years of great memories and self-belief
Same.
moments in each other to pull from.
Yeah, same. So we have to wrap up. I want to do a follow up because I have a lot more. I feel like we have a lot more to talk
Great.
about. But um, I always end on this note, and I think it's an important way to get to know athletes. And, we all have a story. And so I want to hear something that you're proud of that you may
Mm.
have not talked about before, and that, it can be part of your running or outside of your running.
Mm.
But just something that like you might not have talked about before.
That I'm proud of.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, I think that um hmm I think I'm really proud of how I was able to move through this injury. And I know we talked about it at length, but I think there's like been a lot of moments of um trauma within that were really hard for me to move through that I, was able to work with a great psychologist about. And that was something I was really proud of to find my way through and to, I don't know, be patient enough to spend time pouring into my mental health in a time that was so inclined towards physical recovery is something that I'm really proud that I made the time and space for. And has been pivotal in this whole process. And I don't think I could have done the physical component without having poured into that mental side. So I think, yeah, probably that.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And I'm sure it's been crucial as like not only in the recovery, but as you trust your body to push
Yeah.
to the limits again, which is a tough, that's something that I have struggled with is just trusting my body to go hard
Yeah,
again. Um,
exactly.
and it takes time. It takes time. And like sometimes, you know, you gotta, again, talk the talk before you walk the walk. You gotta find trust by testing it. And that is a really scary thing to do.
Yeah. And accepting the the unknown that lies ahead that,
Yeah.
I had to make peace with the fact that I could go out on a run today and do the same thing over again. I certainly hope I don't, but I had to make peace with that logic in order to move forward and to know that I can't control the future. I can only control what I'm doing moment to moment, day to day.
Yeah.
And that is hard. I will keep teaching myself that over and over again in all kinds of ways, but it's the reality.
Yeah. How do you keep that? How do you make space for that acceptance?
I've tried to be a lot more focused on what I'm doing today than what I'm doing tomorrow. And I know that sounds really cheesy and we hear this kind of thing all the time. But I feel like being um just grateful to have gotten in a run today
Yeah.
uh, is something like I thought about a lot when my injury first happened, where I was like, oh my gosh, if only I could have told myself yesterday, like that was going to be your last run for so long. You should have appreciated it more and you should have, stopped at the top for a minute longer and you should have soaked in every moment of it. Like I'm trying to remind myself that this will not last forever. And it's hard to think of life beyond running out around the mountains all the time, but it is the reality that it won't last forever. And I'm trying to, um, I don't know, embrace that so that I can and focus on the here and now a bit more.
Yeah. That's really, really amazing. And for those of you who are going through injury and don't enjoy it all the time, because it was a little bit different for me, I say really cherish the times that you do and don't try and force it when you don't. Cool.
Yes.
Well,
100%.
I've just loved talking to you. Do you have anything else to say?
Sorry, I lost you there for a sec.
No, no problem. I said, I've just loved talking to you so much. Do you have anything else to say?
I mean, just that I think you're so wonderful, and I really appreciate having me on. And I always love our conversations. I feel like we've always solved the world's problems a little bit when we get a chance to catch some miles or catch up. And so I just really appreciate the time and conversation today.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for coming on. And I can't wait to have you on again. I can't wait to see you again. Awesome.
Thank you, friend.